The icy wind that night seemed intent on ripping everything from its place. On one side, Luisa, a Sao Paulo lawyer so used to control that she tries to keep even her own heart on a tight leash. On the other, Miguel, a cowboy with calloused hands who will fight to the end to protect what he loves. In the storm that no one saw coming, their paths cross. Miguel, trapped and hurt in the mud on the road, needing help even if he's too proud to admit it. And Luisa, reluctant, opens the door of the house she inherited from her grandfather, letting a stranger in and turning upside down everything she swore she would never feel again. In the tense silence of those who don't trust, the questions hang between them. Will she manage to shield herself from feeling, or let Miguel slip past her walls? Will he accept her help, or will pride win out? What truly ties these two together, beyond their fear of losing the little they still have left? The start of this story is already clear. No storm is strong enough to keep an unlikely meeting from changing destinies. And you? Will you have the courage to follow them and see just how far love can go? The house seemed smaller during the storm. That sound of heavy rain beating on the roof tiles, as if someone were pounding their fists on the ceiling over and over. Every so often, thunder sliced through the quiet. The only light in the room was from the lamp on the wooden table, where Luisa struggled to organize piles of papers and contracts, all soaked in the smell of things long past. It was hard to focus. In truth, it was hard even to breathe. The way the smell of wet earth seeped through the cracks reminded her of a distant time, childhood, when everything felt too dangerous to trust. She heard the noise before she saw anything, a loud knock on the back door. Just a second of doubt, her muscles tensing, that old sense that danger always arrived like this, unexpected. The hesitation didn't last. She got up slowly, hastily pulled her hair back, swept her eyes over the modest kitchen, and walked toward the door. She opened it cautiously, feeling the cold wind rush in. There he was, a tall man, cowboy clothes streaked with mud, hat crooked, blood trickling down his arm. His face was steady, but the exhaustion showed through. So different from anyone she'd ever crossed paths with in Sao Paulo's corridors. His gaze was intense, a little afraid, a little wary, and only then did she realize she was trembling more from the cold than from fear. His voice was rough, scraping out. "Ma'am, sorry. My horse slipped on the road. There was a landslide. I need shelter until the rain lets up, that's all." Inside, Luisa resisted. Because that's what she did to survive out there. She closed herself off. In the city, she'd learned not to trust what she could see, let alone what she couldn't. But standing there under that storm, she measured the risk. The cut didn't look superficial. He was holding his arm tight, trying to be tough, but his body swayed, knees on the verge of buckling. She stepped aside, not smiling, not offering, just making space and shutting the door right behind him, like someone putting up a barricade. He entered without raising his eyes, already leaving muddy tracks on the wooden floor. The smell of the countryside flooded the kitchen, a mixture of earth, sweat, and a hint of blood. Luisa grabbed the first aid kit before she'd even realized. In silence, she pointed to the chair. He sat down slowly, removing his hat with a motion that carried respect, but also bruised pride. She cleaned the wound the way someone does when it's a duty, not a kindness. The silence between them was weighty. It wasn't comfortable, not even that easy quiet that comes between people who understand each other without words. This was the silence of two strangers forced to share the same shelter, each guarding their own territory. She noticed, while cleaning the blood from his arm, that he was shaking more from tension than cold. Luisa tried to cover her nerves with practical questions. His name, where he lived, what happened. He answered briefly. "Miguel, from Carvalho Ranch, just past the river. I was just trying to get home, but the road ran out before I did." When she pressed the gauze, he stifled a groan and clammed up. His eyes wandered to the papers scattered across the table, to thick books, to an old photograph above the shelf. Now the silence had curiosity in it, and judgment. Luisa felt it. It was as if his eyes were asking what a city woman, used to heels and suits, was doing marooned in a forgotten patch of land. The looks they exchanged held no warmth. Invisible walls surrounded them, each protecting the burdens they carried. She felt his suspicion almost physically, as if she needed to prove she wasn't an enemy. He didn't realize that. Here, she didn't really know who she was, either. The noise from the storm grew louder by the minute, shaking window panes. A leak dripping near the stove. Louisa bit back a sigh, hiding her unease, but Miguel noticed. He adjusted his hat on his lap, licked his cracked lips, stared down at his hands. Dirty, rough, unsure whether to thank her or apologize for the trouble. She heated water for tea, set 2 mugs on the table without asking if he wanted one. Watched from the corner of her eye while he took everything in, memorizing the house. The old tiles, the smell of day-old bread, the pot she hardly ever used. They shared the faint warmth of the lamp and the hot drink, but kept to their own sides of the invisible line. Deep down, Louisa heard her own voice telling her not to get attached, to keep her grip tight, to let no one over her thresholds. She distracted herself with thoughts of the estate, the work she'd left behind in the city, all the things yet unresolved before she could vanish again. Miguel, now and then, glanced out at the rain, the drops sliding down the window as if in a hurry. Sometimes his gaze landed on her, quickly, as if trying to guess who this woman was. A city scent, but a steady hand on the scalpel. In that quiet, both of them seemed to want to speak, but every word felt like a risk. She thought of asking about old Carvalho, about life here. She didn't. She preferred to listen to the wind, to feel the weight of the past in her grandfather's old photographs. She remembered days of fear, of screams, and how she'd learned to survive without asking anyone for help. Now, she was the one in control. But, standing there, Miguel was a living reminder that sometimes life bursts into the house without asking, shattering certainties one after the other. The storm dragged on, and inside that little refuge, time seemed to move differently. At the table, among bandages and rain-damp papers, 2 strangers were just beginning to realize that fate picks its own roads, even when all we want is to keep our distance. And in each strained silence, each brief glance, a thread of understanding grew between them, even if neither yet knew what to call it. By morning, the storm was only a fine drizzle, but inside the small house, the air was still heavy, as if the clouds were hanging just over their heads. It hardly felt like just a night had passed. The scent of wet earth drifted in through the open window, branches dripping outside. It was early, but Miguel was already up, his leg aching with a dull pain, a constant reminder that he didn't belong here. For a moment he lay on the old sofa, trying to get his bearings. Peeling wall, a checked blanket across his stomach, the sound of cups in the kitchen. Strange, being cared for in the heiress's house. Louisa moved through the house quietly, as if walking on eggshells, but everything about her was controlled. Hair pulled back in a flawless ponytail, even at dawn, that hard set to her face, the kind of person who doesn't wake up looking rumpled. She didn't bother with good morning. Just walked into the living room with a box of medicine, scarf at her neck, and looked at Miguel like someone sizing up an unfamiliar animal in the pasture. The silence she carried wasn't like the silence of country people. It came from someone already thinking herself somewhere far away. Miguel thanked her, awkward, a knot in his throat from hating to depend on anyone. He sat up, feeling his legs stiff, and took a glass of water. Her gaze didn't linger longer than needed. Cold gray eyes, just like her grandfather's. He remembered, and it only squeezed his chest tighter. They didn't speak, didn't swap the small talk country folk used to break the ice. Only the sound of the rain and the kettle now and then, as if every saved word were another brick added to the wall between them. Louisa opened the box, took out the pill, double-checked the label dutifully. She passed it to him quickly, eyes focused on the tablet, not on him. The table was stacked too tidy, estate paperwork, folders, planners, as though controlling her surroundings would keep the rest in line. Miguel couldn't help but notice the overcare in every gesture, every piece in its place. She sat, took her tea, turned her back, gazing out the window at a sky still thick with clouds. It wasn't just him who was wary. She looked like she wanted to run, too. Under it all, Miguel felt their difference like a wall. She was city, rush, the world that bowls you over. He was country, slow, the quiet of early mornings. He wondered if she'd really sell it all, if she'd laugh off her grandfather's story and hand everything over to someone who'd never cared for the people here. Why else would a big city lawyer come this far out? Who searches for peace in a forgotten place like this? The fear inside him mingled with anger, a fear almost impossible to swallow. Louisa pretended not to notice his eyes, pretended she was just busy. But every time she passed through the living room, she snuck a look to check if he was still there. She made sure not to get too close, not to brush against him by mistake. It looked like a fear of letting down her guard, of letting something slip. As he fiddled absently with his mug, he noticed she bit her lip when she was deep in thought. An old habit, maybe, the kind people don't realize they have. The silence was more than uncomfortable. It was tense, like the moment when the sky turns green before a storm. Neither knew how to start. Miguel, used to speaking to livestock and simple folk, wanted to ask what she intended, but doubted the point. Louisa, always surrounded by struggle, words chosen with care, didn't leave space for anyone to truly get close. Silence pressed between them, thick. It felt like if either of them broke it, something inside the other might shatter. The smell of fresh bread cut through, closing a little of the distance. She'd left a few slices on the table, beside a jar of jam. Almost funny, she offered food but kept the kitchen door open, as if to remind him, and herself, that this was only temporary. Everything about her said, make yourself at home, but not for long. Eating in silence, the sound of the old wall clock marked the time. Miguel chewed slowly, mind on the horses locked up in the stable, the work piling up, the boss's farm slowly dying. He eyed Louisa sideways, seeing only a hint of tiredness in the hand holding her cup. Did she miss anything too? There was pain in her face. She just hid it better than he did. That morning, not a smile slipped through. She asked, brusquely, if his leg hurt more, if he needed ice, if he wanted her to phone someone. She spoke to the paperwork, not his eyes. Miguel tried to answer quickly. He didn't want to impose, but he couldn't hide how awkward it felt to be so at the mercy of a stranger. Underneath it all, their fear was so much the same. She, afraid someone would storm her world with painful questions. He, afraid of losing everything. The land, the daily rhythm, what made life worth living. Silence stuck to them again, heavy as clay. Sometimes their eyes met, quick, and in that flicker lay all the questions unasked, all the things kept inside. That's how it was. Two strangers in the same house, each clinging to their own fears and past. Outside, it was still rainy, cold, cars distant on the dirt road. Only here did time stand still, waiting for someone to be brave enough to take the first step. Neither was much for conversation. Maybe because, deep down, both only knew how to protect themselves. The morning dragged. Each, locked in their own silence, pretended yesterday's storm hadn't left a mark. But every time she set a cup on the table, or he tried to stand without asking for help, it became clear, behind all that distance was a similar kind of fear. As if, deep down, they needed each other, but neither wanted to admit it. It was late afternoon, and the rain had lost its strength, leaving everything damp and cold. Puddles reflected shreds of gray sky, and the smell of wet earth clung to the house, as if it too wanted to stay inside. For a while, only the soft drip of water from the roof broke the silence. It seemed neither Louisa nor Miguel was eager to talk, each trapped in their own thoughts, and in the awkwardness of sharing tight quarters. She straightened a stack of papers on the living room table. Setting documents in order had always been her armor. Her hands trembled ever so slightly, but she was good at hiding nerves, every move careful, precise. Miguel shifted on the sofa, his bandaged leg propped on a cushion, sniffed the air like he could smell trouble brewing. He was worn out, not just from the gash on his shin or the physical strain, but mostly from not knowing how much of this was still his. It wasn't just pride, it was fear. It was missing the days when his friend's ranch teemed with laughter and cattle passing through the stockyard. A distant clap of thunder made the window vibrate. The deep sound brought Luisa's eyes up. They looked at each other for a second. No smile, just a what now hanging between them. She took a deep breath, steadying herself like before a trial. Looked at the inventory papers, then at him. I'll need to survey the whole property. There's no recent paperwork. It's all a bit of a mess. Her tone was neutral, almost professional, the kind Miguel had heard often from city folks. She didn't notice how cold it sounded. Miguel made a face and coughed. He wasn't one for speeches. He hated to seem desperate, but felt he had to try. That land. It's more than just paper, ma'am. Folks depend on it. 10 families, you know. It's not just cattle, it's the kids' school. If you sell, this whole life goes away. Another silence, heavier this time. The wall clock ticked towards 7, its nervous rhythm mingling with their hearts. Louisa gripped her pen. She wanted to say a lot, but anything she tried felt wrong. Sometimes, thinking too much is its own prison. I know it's hard, she said more quietly, almost to herself. But my grandfather never left anything clear. There's debt, some missing documents. My job is to sort it out. She tried to smile. Nothing came. She exhaled, unable to meet his eyes. Miguel leaned his head back, staring at the ceiling. His dark hair was dry now, but still carried the smell of grass and rain. He scratched his chin, torn between insisting and giving up. He wanted to shout, but all he did was glance at her again, almost with fear. Your grandpa was a good man. I know you're not bad either. I just want you to know, for us, it's a matter of survival. My boss died. If it all goes, I don't know where I'll go. None of them do. Something inside her quivered. Maybe it was just the cold, but it felt like guilt, or maybe an unexpected empathy. Louisa was tired of always being the strong one. She pressed her lips together, thinking back to her own years of struggle, a childhood of closed doors and broken promises. She wanted to open up, but was ashamed of the urge. Miguel noticed the shift in her eyes at that instant. It wasn't weakness or arrogance. It was a humanity he hadn't expected from someone in a suit, someone from outside. Louisa turned her face, wiping her glasses on her shirt. She fought off tears, not for the ranch, but for everything she'd lost and never learned how to ask for help with. I won't make any decision without talking to the community. I just need time to figure things out. I can't promise anything. The words brought them closer even as they set up a new wall. Miguel nodded slowly, relief and suspicion tangled together. Still, mutual respect lingered, a quiet knot that held them on the same thread. He no longer looked at her like a threat. She stopped shielding herself so much. The silence became less hostile. He straightened up, cleared his throat. Whenever you want, I can show you the borders. There's stuff that's not in any papers, only in stories. Paper maps don't tell the whole tale. Louisa managed a faint, sideways smile, the kind almost nobody saw. I think I'll take you up on that guided tour. For a moment, they forgot the storm might come back at any minute. Their bodies relaxed. The dim light in the room cast long shadows on their faces, each trying to hide that longing to trust, that fear of being hurt. Miguel ran a hand through his hair, shyly. Not much comfort around here, but I think you'll manage. He meant it teasingly, but it came out half serious, half challenge. She laughed quietly, surprised at feeling like she belonged, even if just for a moment. It was only a few minutes, but something shifted. There was no need to say it out loud. It showed in the way her hand brushed close to his as she reached for a paper. In how he looked away, not in anger, just to cover the hope that maybe, just maybe, this lawyer from the city wasn't so far removed after all. Nightfall brought promises neither of them knew if they wanted. But underneath, both felt it. This was only the beginning. The sound of the rain became a memory. Where once there'd been thunder and wind, only a damp silence lingered, the smell of wet earth drifting through the kitchen window. The sky wasn't fully bright yet, but golden light was already making its way inside, gently illuminating the simple room. Everything was still too strange for Louisa. She walked barefoot on the rough floor, feeling her way through her unease. The city felt like another planet. Miguel was there, back turned, moving slowly with an old kettle on the wood stove. His movements were cautious, as if apologizing just for being there. The silence between them was awkward, like the start of a hard conversation, though neither dared break it. She thought of going back to her room, finding some excuse, anything. Check emails, call the office, take a shower. But she stayed, watching the back of Miguel's head, his broad shoulders under a shirt still a little damp. The smell of coffee spread through the room, rich and real, almost like an embrace. Louisa was surprised to find herself wanting to accept it, when half of her just wanted to run away from the awkwardness. Maybe it was just exhaustion, or maybe she wanted company. Miguel glanced over his shoulder, just briefly, as if seeking permission. Then he filled 2 mugs, dropping a spoon and sugar on the table, a bit clumsy. No sweetener, he muttered, looking more at his hand than at her. But the sugar's good, comes from the co-op. Louisa nodded with a smile that was more suggestion than reality. She took the mug in both hands, letting warmth seep into her cold fingers. The silence softened, just a bit. She thought of her mother, always complaining that Louisa didn't know how to open up, that everything about her was calculation and defense. Nobody gets close to you like that, honey. Her mother's voice pressed in now, guilt blending with the bitter taste of coffee. They sat facing each other, separated by a wooden table worn by 1,000 past coffees and 1,000 invisible gestures. The wall clock ticked, loud in the stillness, as if everything inside was amplified. Miguel's eyes, usually sharp as knives, slid past her, seeking something out in the green beyond the window. He looked like he didn't know how to start over after the hard night, either. Louisa noticed a fresh scratch on his arm. It was small, just a pink streak on dark skin, but she couldn't help asking. "Has it healed?" She asked softly, almost a whisper. "Yesterday, at least the rain washed the road, but it's still dangerous out there." He shrugged, as if pain was something ordinary, nearly routine. He offered his arm for her to see better. They stayed like that, looking at the cut, her fingers almost touching but freezing midway. A different warmth pooled in her chest. She wanted to ask if it hurt, but the words fled. Miguel picked up on her hesitation and, in a simple gesture, pushed the mug toward her. His eyes locked on hers for just a moment. There was an almost childlike vulnerability there, like someone asking for a truce in the middle of a fight. Not everything gets solved by fighting. Huh, lawyer? There was tenderness to the joke, a way of apologizing without the exact words. His phrase hovered between them. Louisa managed a half-smile soaked with uncertainty, but for a second, her guard slipped. She let slip. I'm not good at fighting. I just don't know any other way to protect myself." Silence again, loaded with something different this time. Not anger, not suspicion. Maybe curiosity. Miguel relaxed a little, adjusting the battered hat he'd tossed on the table. She felt like telling him something, anything, about her life. But how could she explain the weight of the past, the aching loneliness of always having to manage alone, without revealing wounds she barely knew how to name? Miguel didn't push, just waited quietly, as if he was used to waiting for things in their own time. So far from the men she knew in the city, always in a hurry, always with answers, strong opinions. He was presence. He was patience. Their coffee was nearly cold when Louisa spoke, looking out the window. "I never thought I'd come back here. Always thought this place was too small for me." Miguel laughed gently. The sound was soft, warming her more than the drink. "Not small, just different. Time moves different here. Silence is different, too." They looked at each other again. A long, steady look, and this time neither turned away. It wasn't a challenge, but a desire to know, to see each other. For a moment, Louisa felt safe enough to breathe. So rare, so precious, it almost hurt. The wind swept in through the window, musing her hair. Miguel noticed and didn't hide it. Reflexively, she tucked a stray strand behind her ear, slightly embarrassed. His face softened, lips pressing together as if holding back an old longing. The feeling lingered, unnamed, hanging between them. Suddenly, Louisa laughed to herself. Nothing had really changed, but for a few minutes, the world felt lighter. Miguel finished his coffee in a gulp, pushing the chair back. He got up, hesitated, but instead of leaving, paused an extra second, looking at her like he saw something no one else ever had. "Thanks for the shelter. And for the coffee, and the company." She took a while to find an answer. All she managed was a real smile. Her heart beat a little out of order. Fear and hope tangled together, like sun after a storm. The silence that remained between them didn't ask for forgiveness. It was comfort. It was a beginning. "I never thought coming back to my grandfather's house would make me feel so small." The key, that old brass key, still dangled from its rusty ring. My hand was shaking just turning it. Strange, when I'd faced down judges, gone up against people much tougher, knocked down arguments made of concrete. Yet there, at the time-worn wooden door, it seemed like every monster from my childhood was waiting on the other side. The smell? I can't explain it. Wet earth, cold coffee, old wood. With one breath, my eyes started to burn, and it wasn't from the dust. The silence had weight, pressing against my skin, squeezing the air out. I took a slow, deep breath. Deep down, I knew this would hurt, but I needed to face it all, to decide what to do. It wasn't just the will or the paperwork. It was my story, my childhood abandoned in this far-off place. Miguel came in after me. He didn't even ask for permission. He just walked in. He seemed bigger in that space. Maybe because everything there was simpler, more his style. His boots scraped loudly across the wooden floor. I heard it, but I didn't look at him. I felt that weird sensation of not wanting to be alone, but also not wanting anyone around. I wandered through the living room, slowly. The couch, the rug full of holes, the broken picture frame. I ran my finger over the dust on a bookshelf. I stopped in front of the old glass cabinet. A photo. My grandfather holding my hand on a rainy Sunday. I was wearing braids, with a crooked, almost forced smile. His face wasn't happy, it was tired. How long had it been since I'd seen that look? Out of nowhere, I was hit by a dumb longing for someone I'd thought I wouldn't miss. I felt Miguel get closer. He didn't face me, just stayed nearby, off to the side, careful not to get too close. He noticed my fist clenching around the photo. I think my knuckles turned white from gripping it so hard. I stood there for ages, just staring at those images. My mind was a tangled mess. I thought about how easy it was to run away, how I'd always escaped anything that was hard. Maybe that's why I'm so good at locking my heart in a vault. Miguel cleared his throat, quietly. The silence hanging between us wasn't comfortable. It was brittle. You could almost hear your own thoughts, too loud. He looked at the bookshelf, not at me. Mr. Prado liked this room. He'd spend his afternoons there, reading, he said, pointing to the battered armchair half sunk in the corner. I nodded, but couldn't answer. The lump in my throat only got tighter. Inside, part of me was screaming, "Don't let anyone see this side." But another part just wanted to sit down on the floor and cry like a kid. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head, that sharpness disguised as advice. I saw a little bundle of letters tied with twine. I picked it up, almost by accident. The crooked handwriting, dated before I was even born. Letters of promises, debts, cries for help. My grandfather was never one to say, "I love you." He gave tough advice and orders, that's it. My hand shook harder. Imagine opening that, discovering secrets, holes, but also maybe something that would change everything. I felt heat on my cheeks and realized I was crying. Stubborn tears, insistent. I turned away, but it was too late to hide it. That's when I realized Miguel was standing closer. He waited a moment, like someone weighing a fence before climbing over. And then he did something, so small but so important. He just put his hand on my arm, gently, no pressure. His fingers were rough, warm, just a touch, enough to pull me out of that pit of memories. I thought about pulling my arm away, running again. Why is it so hard to accept comfort? But I stayed. I felt the weight of his touch and, at the same time, a strange relief. It wasn't like in the movies. I didn't forget the pain, nothing suddenly got better. But for the first time in ages, I let someone get close when I was falling apart. Miguel didn't say anything, didn't pry, didn't judge. His touch was a silent invitation. You can fall apart here, if you want. Quiet permission not to be strong all the time. I don't even know how long I stayed like that. All I know is the anger, guilt, fear, all of it swirled inside me like a storm. I watched his hand. Would he let go? Did he realize how nervous I was? A million questions shot through my mind, but so did this wild hope that he'd just stay, even if I didn't know why. In the end, I exhaled slowly and let go of the letters. A shiver ran up my arm. It felt like that moment just before a big verdict. The second you know everything could change, and there's no going back. The smell of the past was still strong. Every corner of the house echoed with old secrets. I realized then that it's okay. Sometimes there are no easy answers. Sometimes, all you have is now, and the chance not to run. Miguel withdrew his hand carefully, like he was silently asking for permission. I nodded, a thank you without words, just a look. His brow furrowed slightly, as if he wanted to understand my pain but already knew he couldn't. The silence between us felt lighter, less dangerous. Embarrassed, I started to see that he was trying to take care without overwhelming me. And some part of me, the part that always clung to control, started to loosen, if only a little. There weren't any hugs or grand speeches, just that almost invisible care and the quiet recognition of two souls marked by time, each learning, in their own way, to stand by someone even when everything says you should run. In that moment, I think I finally understood that the weight of the past doesn't have to drown me forever, because there, under that same old roof, even the silence became a kind of shelter. The morning came in softly, with a reluctant sun trying to tear through the mist lingering over the fields. Luisa woke slowly, her body heavy after so many nights of poor sleep. She lay there a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to that strange silence of the house, not hers, but already familiar with the sound of her footsteps. Sometimes, the absence of noise felt even more deafening than Sao Paulo's chaotic traffic. She went down to the kitchen cautiously, as if any object there might reveal a secret. She tried to make coffee, not sure of the ratios, craving a routine in the midst of all this unknown. The wooden table still bore the marks of old conversations. Someone had scraped initials into it, maybe on a hot night, laughing. She traced the marks with her fingers, thinking how odd it felt to look for a place in the world after so long just trying to survive. It was Visitors' Day. Dona Laura, Miguel's neighbor from the next farm over, had sent word that she'd be coming to welcome the new lady. That ruffled Luisa. She didn't know how to receive people and didn't like being received. She always felt exposed, like standing in a courtroom. She heard voices outside, a mix of laughter, feet shuffling on the porch, and the sound of a barking dog. The smell of damp earth drifted in through the door, along with a breeze that kicked up dust and promised a storm. Opening the door, she was hit by the whole rural world at once. Dona Laura was surrounded by 3 boys in muddy boots, each one more restless than the next. Beside them, her husband, Seu Clemente, carried fresh cheese wrapped in a checkered cloth. Everyone spoke at once, gesturing widely. Luisa smiled, but it took her a while to relax her shoulders. Every glance felt like a silent judgment, or maybe that was just her. Dona Laura came right in, telling stories about when she first knew Luisa's grandfather. She grabbed her hand, squeezing tight, a strange gesture for someone who grew up learning to keep her hands hidden. Laura noticed, for a second, that Luisa wanted to pull away, but she didn't let go. She just looked right at her, as if to say, "Sooner or later, you'll have to trust someone." Miguel appeared with the group, half lurking behind, half at her side, as if looking for protection but also wanting distance. His boots were caked with mud up to the ankle. When Luisa met his eyes, she felt a mix of discomfort and relief. He didn't say a word, just gave her a slow nod, but stayed, witness and shield. The kitchen soon felt too small for everyone. The smell of warm bread, cheese, and strong coffee mixed with the children's easy laughter and chatter about the weather. "Rain's coming, sweetheart. You'll need to shut the windows or everything will get soaked." Luisa nodded, trying to take it all and more than to respond. Her eyes studied everything. The youngest boy's bitten nails, the gentle way Dona Laura adjusted her hairnet, Miguel's subtle silence as he quietly observed. Now and then, someone would ask her about city life. Luisa answered with short, shallow phrases, and they quickly switched back to cows and harvests, subjects she didn't even know how to begin to discuss. She smiled, but it was a used-up smile, the kind she'd rehearsed for parties and conferences, unable to reach deep. Somewhere in the chaos, someone made a joke about the fancy lawyer washing clothes out back. Everyone laughed, even Miguel. Luisa felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and a stubborn pride. Here, every word was a struggle to be understood. She tried to balance what was expected of her with what she had to offer. Deep down, she wondered if she'd ever get used to this, or whether she even wanted to. There was pride in the rough manners of country life, a different kind of dignity than in the courtrooms. Luisa saw it in Dona Laura's eyes, that firm handshake, the way everyone shared food without ceremony. Miguel spent some time in the doorway, arms crossed, watching Luisa like she was a riddle. She caught herself staring at him when she thought no one was looking, searching for answers he couldn't give. The silence between them was thick, packed with questions neither dared to ask. Sometimes she'd catch him smiling, a half-hidden smile, when he overheard her stumbling through an answer. After coffee, the boys threatened to sprint across the yard. Laura and Clemente gathered their things, thanking Luisa as if they'd spent days together. On her way out, Dona Laura made sure to hug Luisa again, tighter this time, whispering in her ear, "We look after our own around here." Only she and Miguel were left. The sound of rain was growing, promising an afternoon under gray skies. He leaned against the doorframe, pretending to be indifferent. For a moment, neither of them said a word. Outside, the smell of wet grass filled the air. Inside, there was only the calm heat of forced company. Luisa leaned her hands against the sink, feeling the nerves ebbing away. She searched for Miguel's eyes through the window. He met her gaze, no masks. It felt, in that instant, like they were fighting the same war, even if they couldn't admit it. In that heavy, loaded silence, she realized something was shifting between them, slowly, almost out of sight. It was small, but it was real. That morning had a different kind of silence. It wasn't the peaceful hush of chickens scratching in the yard, or the lazy cattle in the fields. It was something heavier, a void that seemed to fill every room and made even her footsteps feel farther apart. I noticed when Miguel came into the kitchen, clothes still stained with dried mud, the kind of tiredness on his face that comes from more than just work. He glanced at me, but didn't really see me. It was like I'd suddenly become part of the scenery, not the person he'd talked with for hours on the porch the night before. Funny how the cold can change everything. The wind came through the cracks in the window, tickling the hairs on my neck, raising goosebumps on my arms, even in a thick sweatshirt. Miguel just stood there in the doorway for a few seconds, and I knew, just by looking at him, that all those words he never says were stuck in his throat. The coffee cup in my hands felt heavy. I caught myself watching him fidget in his pocket, the automatic way he took off his hat, rubbed his forehead, like he had to build a wall between himself and the whole world. When he finally spoke, his voice came out low and strained. "You don't have to bother with lunch today." I almost asked him to repeat that. But no, he kept his eyes on the distance, as if he'd only stopped there to catch his breath, not realizing, maybe, that his words were a knife. I answered, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out weak, betraying how insecure I felt. "All right, are you going into town?" He just shrugged, not even pretending to include me in his plans. That hurt. It was all in the little things, the way he didn't look at me, how his hands stayed clenched, his feet itching at the door. It always felt like something was missing, like a good smell had disappeared from the air. I asked myself if I'd done something wrong, or if it was about last night's phone call, the one he overheard. My head spun. It was just a call to the office, talking about the paperwork for the estate, nothing big. That's what I told myself. Part of me wanted to go after him, come clean. But another part, that old, deep-rooted habit that says talking too much only brings trouble, held back. I sat there, tasting the bitterness of cold coffee. After Miguel left, the house turned colder, like he'd taken all its warmth with him. I wandered from room to room, looking at my grandfather's old furniture, drawing lines in the dust on the picture frames. I tried to work, but the letters on the screen wouldn't stay still, lost in the silence. The few messages from the office seemed distant, all business. Out there, everything felt simple, defined. I looked out the window. It was raining softly, the kind that never seems to stop. The smell of wet earth mixed with my fear of losing control. Sometimes, the countryside demands a calm I don't have. I missed the city, the horns, the crowded sidewalks, the way busyness let me hide. Here, every silence shouted. Especially the silence between Miguel and me. The way he didn't ask questions, the way he didn't want to know. Somehow that hurt more than any open rejection. Late in the afternoon, I heard the familiar sound of his truck. My breath caught, and I went to the porch, but stopped before heading down the steps. For a split second, I saw Miguel watching his cattle, cursing under his breath when one strayed out of line. Every movement, his strong arm on the fence, the way he clenched his jaw, looked harder, more closed off than ever. When our eyes finally met, I tried to smile. But he looked away first, like my face was too much to figure out. My chest tightened in that strange place between pain and anger. I wanted to yell that I was here, that I didn't want to mislead anyone. But the words died, swallowed by pride and shame. Night fell cold. I made soup, left the pot there in case he wanted to eat. But he stayed outside till late, talking to folks from the neighbor's place. I only heard muffled laughter, no more that voice from before, full of stories to share with me. I wandered through the dark living room, holding my own body to keep the chill away. Every memory of how we'd gotten close turned to dust, vanished into the autumn wind. The strangest thing was, even as I argued with myself inside, a tiny kernel of hope wouldn't go away. Because, somehow, that silence hurt but didn't feel final. It was almost like a pause, like we needed a little time out in the rain to figure out which way to go. The problem is, waiting is always hardest for those who've learned never to ask anyone for anything. Lying in bed, the sound of the storm outside reminded me of how it all started. I thought about going back to Sao Paulo, giving up, turning my back on what I couldn't understand. But the image of Miguel's face, hard but vulnerable in that cold, wouldn't let me. I knew I was hiding things from him. But I also knew that, out there on the porch, he held back a part of himself that was afraid, too. It's strange how the fear of losing can be the same as the fear of getting close. I stared at the ceiling, listened to the wind, hoping that tomorrow we'd find a way to cut through that wall of silence. Because, deep down, the need to be understood was stronger than the fear of being wrong. And somehow, even without knowing how, I desperately wanted to get over the wall that, for that night at least, stood between us. The power went out with a snap. The generator, which used to hum quietly out back, had died completely after the last storm. For a while, there was only the sharp sound of old wood settling and the muffled rain outside. The breeze carried the smell of wet earth through the cracked window. The house felt frozen in time. Louisa stood in the kitchen, flipping a match until the smell of sulfur burned her nose. She found 2 candles in the crooked table drawer and lit them slowly, trying not to show how much her hands were shaking. She wasn't afraid of the dark, not exactly, but of the feeling of being completely exposed, of having no distractions left to hide behind. In the silence, every little sound gained size, a chair scraping, a glass clinking, the way Miguel breathed across the room. He just pulled out a chair, boots still caked with mud, and didn't say anything. His eyes searched for hers for a second, then drifted away. That recent tension between them still hung in the air. It wasn't open anger or pure distrust. It was a wary kind of distance, as if they were both watching each other from behind invisible walls. Louisa felt like saying something, anything, to break the mood. To talk about Sao Paulo, traffic, or even to ask about the weather, though that would have sounded ridiculous here. Instead, she simply let go, almost literally, and sat down across from him at the square table, close to the warm blur of candlelight. The silence stretched longer than it should have. It was heavy, yes, but not oppressive. A silence that gave room to feel. A silence where you could hear your own heart, and, if you listened closely, maybe the other person's too. She noticed how tired his face looked beneath the cap, the dark circles, the unshaven jaw. Up close, Miguel was less stoned than he seemed from far away. His distracted look rested on her again. There was something there, a question he didn't dare ask. Louisa twisted a ring around her finger without realizing. The metal sliding over skin was an old habit, something she did when she needed to think. And she was thinking too much. Maybe it was the warmth of the candle or the comforting sound of rain outside, but the words just spilled out. I slept badly last night, you know. Her voice came out soft, almost a whisper. Miguel lifted his eyes, uncertain whether to answer. Finally he said, gently, too much wind. She shook her head. No, I think it's something else. Her eyes almost shimmered in the half-light. For a while she just listened to herself breathe. This place is so isolated. Sometimes it scares me. He straightened up, laying his big hands on the table, lacing his fingers, cracking a knuckle. Looked like he was about to say something, but held back. The way he looked at her was as if he understood the words she didn't say. Louisa bit her lip, watched the flame. I've never been one to trust people, she admitted, voice barely audible, eyes on her own hand. I grew up hearing that strong people don't cry, showing feeling is weakness. But here, I don't know, it feels like everything might fall apart if I don't hold it all together. She felt foolish. The silence grew awkward, but not sharp, more as if Miguel was just waiting for her. He really listened, not interrupting, not pretending. He just let her be. I wish I weren't so closed off, she confessed, more quietly, staring at her hand. I wish I could trust. Behind that honesty, she felt again those nights alone in her Sao Paulo apartment, sirens far away, her soul almost always cold, that constant sense of fighting. On the farm, the cold was physical, but somehow less frightening. Miguel breathed in deep. He looked at the candle flame, as if there was strength in it. His face hardened for a second, maybe out of embarrassment, but his eyes were gentle. Everyone thinks I don't get scared, he began, his voice rough, country accent stronger than usual. Just because I've always been here, always able to handle the work, the debts, other people. But, he gave a sheepish laugh, another sigh. The biggest fear is losing everything. And I don't just mean the land. It's losing what we built, what someone left for us. The fear of emptiness. Louisa nodded. She understood more than she could ever confess. For a moment, the two of them just stared at the flame, feeling that passing heat on their faces. The physical distance no longer felt as big as it had a few hours ago. "Sometimes I wake up thinking it's stupid to keep fighting to hold on to this place," he said, voice slow. "But every bit of this ground is a piece of me, and of a bunch of people's stories. I wish I weren't so proud. But letting go's not easy." She saw herself in his portrait, giving up her life to hold on to something she probably should have already let go. "I'm stubborn too," she whispered. He gave her a crooked smile. "That's something we have in common." Luisa's fingers stretched before she realized, skimming the edge of the candle, careful not to get burned. Her fingertips trembled, more from nerves than cold. The light painted shadows on his face, showing all the marks and history that made him. She wanted to know each one. Little by little, the conversation gave way to something else. Not words anymore. A different kind of silence. The good kind, full of possibility. In that soft yellow light, Luisa realized maybe she didn't have to hide her hurt anymore. She also saw that Miguel wasn't her threat. Maybe he was the only one who could ever understand what she'd never dared to say. The night went on like that. Just a few gestures, lingering looks, deep breaths. The rain faded to a trickle, and for a while there was no past, no plan for tomorrow. Only a quiet hope, born by the light of two worn-down candles in a house forgotten by the world. It had been raining since morning. One of those autumn rains that seemed to wash the earth, the sky, even your memories. The house swelled with the smell of damp earth, wet wood, a nostalgia for childhood tangled in the sound of raindrops on glass. Luisa hadn't meant to spend the day there, but she couldn't leave that improvised office. Piles of boxes, yellowed papers, moldy old folders scattered across the rug. Each page held a piece of old Prado, the grandfather she had only ever truly known in his silence. Luisa's fingers were cold. She wrapped herself tighter in an old cardigan, stared at a forgotten mug of coffee, listened distantly as thunder rolled through the valley. Sometimes memories surfaced, her, a child in muddy feet, yanked away by her mother who wanted nothing to do with that world. But now it was different. Now it was just her, and a farm where time seemed to run in circles. She was packing away old letters when a sheet slipped free. It looked like nothing, just a folded notebook page, corners nearly falling apart. But the handwriting caught her eye, her grandfather's, firm, straight, a man with no patience for frills. She started to read. It was a promise, the kind of thing adults say to ease an old guilt. Miguel Carvalho's name was there, a debt never paid. Old Prado had promised something to Miguel's family, a bit of land, some money, maybe a formal commitment. The promise was right there, signed, but never notarized, never made official in the eyes of the law. For an instant, Luisa felt her stomach knot. The silence in the room became heavy, almost solid, as if she'd just told herself an ugly truth. She remembered how Miguel spoke of her grandfather. Respect, bitterness, that strange mix of gratitude and betrayal. Everything became clear at once. She wondered if it was worth showing the paper. What would Miguel think? That she was trying to bargain, pay a debt for someone already dead? Or that she, a lawyer full of rules and contracts, saw other people's feelings as just another clause to settle? The wind rattled the windows. The smell of rain came in stronger. Luisa closed her eyes for a moment, afraid to fool herself. Underneath it all she wondered. To help Miguel? Was it just justice, or something else? Was she getting in too deep and didn't know it? When she finally found Miguel, he was muddy from head to toe, coming back from the pasture, shirt plastered to his skin, sweat and rain mixing on his brow. He looked so tired, and the silence between them always had that flavor. "I should just go back to the city, and you ought to stay." She spoke first, paper trembling in her hands. "Miguel, I found something in my grandfather's things. It's about you, your family, really." She wasn't sure whether to meet his eyes or just stare at the ground. Miguel's look was direct, attentive, but wary. He always expected a blow, a demand. She saw it in the way he crossed his arms, hiding his chest behind his forearm. What kind of thing? A promise. Luisa showed him the paper. "He promised to help you." "It looks like he never did." Miguel stared at the paper for a long time, without picking it up, without saying a word. You could see emotion working across his face. Anger, maybe. Suspicion. But there was also the faintest flicker of relief, the quiet recognition that he wasn't crazy to feel that weight, that unfinished business. In the silence, the world seemed to pause. Only the splattering rain broke the stillness. She spoke again, this time more softly. If I want to, I could contest this, make this promise count. Maybe that would solve the problem with your land. Miguel stayed silent, drifting away for a few seconds as he stared out the window, broad back, heavy breaths. He wasn't a man for protocols, hated papers, and cold deals. He had his word, his handshake. But right now, here, he needed the piece of paper he'd always believed never existed. When he returned, his eyes had grown more serious. And why are you doing this, Louisa? Because it's the right thing, or because you feel sorry for me? She bit her lip. She wanted to answer right away, but it was complicated. She wanted to say it wasn't pity, wasn't charity, wasn't just justice. But she also wanted to protect herself, not give too much away. I don't know. Maybe because I know what it feels like to wait for a promise to be kept. And also because, she stopped. The rest was a secret. Miguel stepped closer, his voice low, almost a whisper. I don't want your pity, Louisa. I can handle losing anything. What I can't handle is being just a debt. In that moment, everything grew small. The storm outside, her life in Sao Paulo, the courtrooms, the pushy partners, the account balances that never made sense. All that mattered was this man in front of her, proud and afraid, waiting for her not to betray what little he had left. For a second, all she wanted was to hold him. But she stayed where she was, balanced between impulse and reason, like always. He finally took the paper, let his finger linger over old Prado's signature. Swallowed hard. This changes things. His voice faltered, and it was as if he admitted weakness. And in the silence that followed, there was no anger, no overt gratitude. Just the heavy burden of someone who's spent a lifetime carrying absences, and suddenly has to accept when a hand is offered. They spent only a few minutes together in that room, surrounded by papers, dust, rain, and uncertainty. But in that space, every breath meant something. They didn't have all the answers, didn't know what would come next. But that night, each saw in the other not a rival, not a stranger, but someone possible. Sometimes, when the rain hit harder and the wind rattled the light, Louisa understood that the past could be mended. And maybe, for the first time, it wasn't just about justice. Maybe it was about hope, too. Time changes quickly in the countryside. Just when it seemed calm had returned to that land, right after the dust from her grandfather's papers had settled, after Louisa and Miguel started to understand each other, each respecting the other's space, but inching closer, like someone tiptoeing into a room right before taking it for real, everything flipped upside down again. The rumor came first. It slipped through the front gate, whispered by the neighbor's maid. The real heir was coming back. Nobody really knew who this man was, just that he wasn't the type to lose. Career made in the big city, hard face, troubled promises. They said he was ready to fight for anything he believed was rightfully his. The afternoon he showed up, the wind was uneasy. Heavy clouds, everything still, branches twisting, restless dogs. Louisa thought it was just tiredness, but her stomach clenched when she saw a black car kicking up dust on the dirt road. Miguel was already outside, waiting the way people do when thunder rumbles in the distance and you don't want to admit it's coming. When the car stopped with a jolt, nobody laughed. A sharply dressed man got out, dark suit, a watch that gleamed. He didn't fit, not with the land, not with any of it. He walked toward them, heavy steps, each one measured. His eyes were cold, harsh. There was none of Miguel's simmering warmth, only a chill that wouldn't go away. So, you're Luisa Prado, he said, his voice slicing the air like a knife. She didn't flinch, but her hands clutched each other behind her back until they hurt. I just want to settle the estate and make sure things are done right, she replied, trying to hide her fear with someone used to getting his way by force. The man laughed, humorless. What's right is what's on paper. And there's way too much paper here. Too many weird documents. Looks like my uncle liked making promises to anybody. Miguel adjusted his hat and stepped closer to her. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The silence between them spoke. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was armor. An unspoken shield. Louisa felt, more than ever, that this wasn't just about land. It was about being seen, about someone standing up for you. But Miguel held some distrust too. She felt it in the way he folded his arms tight. The air circled them with his eyes. Everyone here is grateful to my uncle. I know that. But the party's over. I'll file a lawsuit, kick people out if I have to. I want to see who dares challenge me. The words hung heavy in the air. The farmhands listened from afar, pretending to be busy. Their hands caked in dirt trembled, their eyes dropped low. It was fear of losing everything. It was a silent rage, but no one dared speak. They just waited for Luisa or Miguel to do something. Inside, Luisa fought herself. She was the same girl as before, daughter of someone who'd always lost, afraid of trouble, unsure if she was really strong or just pretending. Her father always said the world was dangerous for those who felt too much. Maybe that's why she loved the law so much. On paper, no one bleeds. Miguel stood still, but was ready to explode. Luisa noticed his fist clenched tight, his jaw set, stealing the calm from his face. She thought of all the hard days, his dedication to those people, the way he looked at her when he thought no one saw, as if ashamed to need someone, but needing them just the same. The air turned colder. A strange draft blew through the room, though no window was open. The air walked around, eyeing the old paintings, the simple furniture, as if everything was disposable. He stopped in front of Luisa. You've got a future in the city. Don't waste your time with these country folk. I'll pay double what that land's worth. Take it and go. She wanted to curse him out, but took a deep breath instead. A painful silence stretched. She looked at Miguel, slowly, that longing look that begs for help without a word. He met her gaze. Strength, pride, but something cracked too, a fear of not measuring up. In that instant, it felt like the whole world was slipping from under her feet. The fear of losing, of trusting, of not being enough. I'm not selling, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Her knees wobbled, but she didn't retreat. I do have a commitment, but it's to my grandfather's memory and to the people here. I won't betray that. The heir tilted his head in a sneer. We'll see. You're a lawyer, right? Get ready. I'm not going easy on anyone here. He left with as much anger as he'd arrived, slamming the door, the scent of expensive cologne and threat hanging in the air. Inside, the silence shifted. It went from tense to heavy. Miguel looked at her, eyes full of questions he'd never asked. Are you sure about this? Even after all you heard, all you might lose. She tried to smile, but it came out brief, shy, the smile of someone who doesn't know how to let kindness in. I'm not sure about almost anything, Miguel. But if we don't try, we'll spend our lives running away. Miguel smiled, barely, but it was as if his face brightened a little. He reached out, hesitated, then gripped her arm. It wasn't about passion, it was gratitude, relief. Luisa felt a strange warmth inside, like a fresh green leaf growing in the middle of autumn. For a second, neither said anything. The wind outside battered the roof. People watched from afar, peeking from the porch, hoping for smiles where there was only doubt. But that night, it was just the two of them, together in silence, against storms bigger than themselves. Fear was there, sitting between them, but some kind of hope too, bitter, stubborn, as real as anything. And so the two of them remained, close together, ready to face whatever came. Even if they didn't quite trust each other yet, their eyes said what they couldn't yet speak. I'll stay here, even if you tell me to go. That morning was colder than usual. The fireplace still held embers from the night, but the house, and everything in it, felt strange, invaded by a wind that came from inside. Neither Miguel nor Luisa had slept well. Both walked on eggshells, barely meeting each other's eyes. Each tucked away in their own corner, muttering chores just to fill the silence. Luisa opened the porch door and forced herself to breathe that sharp air. Standing there, looking out over the pale vastness of the farmland, she tried to convince herself she felt nothing. It was just tiredness, she told herself. That feeling, this ache in her chest, it was just work worries. But it wasn't, and she knew it. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from a colleague, from her boss, from the office demanding answers. In the middle of all those notifications came the offer, a top law firm, a new position, a salary that seemed impossible. And, most of all, the chance to disappear, run from the knot tightening inside her. The mess that Miguel, the farm, and her grandfather's past had stirred up. She read it with a dry throat, haunted by the ghost of the girl who used to fall asleep, scared, every night. Afraid to fail, afraid to love and lose. She almost set foot outside, but the mud in the yard and the scent of earth always kept her grounded. The gate creaked in the distance. Miguel was coming closer, buttoning his shirt in a rush. Judging by his hair, by the tiredness in his eyes, he hadn't slept either. There was something old on his shoulders, distrust or pride. She couldn't tell. "Morning," he said, without meeting her gaze. His voice was harsh. She answered softly. The silence hung between them like a third person. He stared at the cattle, the gentle rain outside. She stared at her hands, sitting on the porch step. Now and then, their eyes met and darted away, as if the act itself was dangerous. And maybe it was. Then Miguel spoke. Direct, ripping off the bandage in one go. "So you're really selling this land, huh?" City people always find a higher bidder. The way he said it stung. Luisa wanted to shout that no. It was different. She wasn't like the others. But her mouth froze. The fear of explaining herself too much and getting hurt. Again. "It's not just that, Miguel." He looked up right away, eyes so full of hurt and anger she felt a pinch of fear. Or pity. "Then what is it, counselor? You're going back to your fancy life and leaving all this behind, just like you always said." That word, counselor, hurt. It turned all her hard-won achievements into an insult. "Don't talk to me like that, please. She bit her lip, and again those memories. The girl nobody defended, who'd armed herself with sharp words just to get by. He noticed, and it made him even angrier. "You know, people around here fight their whole lives. So the boss won't sell, so the bank won't take it, so the city won't swallow up what's ours. I thought you, at least, would understand." There was so much fire in his eyes, so much truth. Luisa lost any hope of explaining herself. Deep down, she wished it could be simple, to go back to just being herself, with no one left to disappoint. "I could never destroy what your boss built here, or what my grandfather left behind." She tried, her voice choked. But the conversation was already lost. Miguel turned away, kicking a clump of mud. His hands trembled. The rain picked up suddenly, heavy, drumming the rooftops. Inside the house, the sound was almost deafening, but all it did was make their silence more obvious. Miguel exhaled, as if to say something important, but gave up. He wiped his face, sweat and rain mixing with tears he refused to let fall. Luisa's chest clenched. "I think you should go, Luisa." Her name, full like that, was a sentence. Never Lou, never girl. There was no affection, just the emptiness of someone closing the door from the inside. She stood there, letting his words echo. Thought about begging, but knew it wouldn't help. The unfairness burned, but pride burned hotter. So, without looking back, she walked inside, grabbed the suitcase she'd almost packed the day before, as if deep down, she'd known this was coming, and strode out, every step deliberate. The hallway seemed longer, and for an instant the smell of burnt coffee, his laughter in the kitchen, their hands brushing against each other at the sink, almost made her pause. But no, leaving was all she had left. Crossing the porch, Miguel stood there, hat askew, face hard. But his eyes were a cry for help. She pretended not to notice. She made her way to the car, feeling each step, the mud gripping her boots, the cold wind slapping her cheeks. The rain was gone, just cold and a sky threatening to fall at any moment. She shut the car door harder than she needed to. Wanted to make it final, but it wasn't. The engine struggled to start. The windshield fogged up. For a second, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Saw the house get smaller, Miguel's back turned, head bowed. She almost turned around. But she didn't. Driving down the road, the radio music seemed to mock her. Songs about lost love, longing, broken promises. Luisa forced herself to turn it off. Inside, it felt like a new storm, just like that first night, was about to explode. But now there was no fireplace to protect her, and no one to catch her if she fell. The silence in the car was absolute, and for the first time in a long time, she wasn't in control of anything. I can't explain why longing starts, or when it seeps into your chest and sticks, like the finest dust, inside you. All I know is, after that argument, Luisa felt lost in Sao Paulo. She tried to distract herself with the noise of cars below, thought she might vanish into a sea of honking and sirens. The microwave's digital clock glowed blue in the dark kitchen. Almost 2 a.m., and she couldn't even remember when she'd last turned out the lights. She ran her fingers through her hair, tangled from fitful sleep, and lay staring at the ceiling, missing him. It was strange. She'd thought going back to her routine would be easy. Law had always been her refuge, suiting up to fight in courtrooms where no one knew her childhood wounds. Now it wasn't enough. The city, once her shelter, felt like a stage of voices that meant nothing. Every time she crossed the marble hall of the new office, with its expensive rugs and pungent coffee, she was hit by that silly memory, the scent of wet grass. The old wooden porch. Miguel, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, staring at a horizon only he could see. Luisa even tried to hate him after their last fight. She had reason. Everyone's got pride, and hers bigger than most. But every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the way Miguel furrowed his brow, as if trying to guess what she felt, without ever asking. She remembered the warm, awkward brush of his hand on hers that stormy night. As if it was wrong for someone like him, tough, accustomed to pain and dirt, to be so gentle with a broken woman. Outside, the traffic flowed. Inside her, the silence was louder. She couldn't explain that solitude to anyone. Not to her therapist, not to old friends who kept asking when she'd get married, when she'd laugh more at life. The truth she never told was that her sincerest laughter in ages had come, almost by accident, sitting on a makeshift bench with Miguel, watching a rainstorm destroy the newly planted corn. He'd made some comment about cowboys not even liking to lose the rain, and she'd let out a laugh that ached in her belly. Luisa tried to bury herself in work. Spent hours fighting clauses, contracts, phone calls. She had every reason to feel strong again, but she felt weak. So weak that, at night, the emptiness seemed to echo off the walls of her big apartment. She stopped at the window sometimes, gazing at the bright avenue, and wondered, did he miss her too? Far away, back in the countryside, Miguel sat on the threshold of his door. Faint light, only the kitchen lamp on. The usual cups and plates scattered everywhere, but he barely noticed. What hurt was the empty space beside him, out on the porch. The bench where Luisa used to sit, hands folded in her lap, hiding from the chill at nightfall. The lingering smell of strong, slightly bitter coffee still sometimes left his forgotten mug. He'd close his eyes, staring at nothing, thinking of words spoken too quickly, words said without thinking. She'd left, eyes cutting through him like a blade. Miguel wanted to believe anger was stronger, because anger was easier than asking forgiveness. No one had ever stayed long enough in his life for him to miss them. That's simple. One day they were there, the next they'd left, each for their own reason. But with Luisa it was different. He missed her presence, that invisible baggage of someone who carries too much longing in their chest and refuses to show it. The way she wiped her tears quickly, pretending they never fell. How her hands shook, sometimes, when talking about the past, though she'd never asked for help. Miguel closed his eyes and remembered her scent, soft perfume, mixed with the day's sweat, with the cold air blowing through the porch. He missed the silence they shared, each wrestling their own fears, but still, it was a comfortable silence, as if they'd known each other forever. That night, Luisa's chest hurt so much she had to sit down, leaned her back against the hallway wall, expensive dress bunched at her knees. She cried quietly, with no one to comfort her, and, sitting there, she felt like she didn't belong anywhere anymore. The apartment seemed far too big. Every step echoed, each room vacant. Everything in her screamed for an answer. She pressed her hand over her heart, trying to hold it together as it thudded hard at the memory of Miguel's brown eyes. Always so direct, so unguarded. Why does it hurt so much to want to go back, she thought. Why is it so hard to admit I want him, that I need that simple world, with no lies, no will, no armor at all? There was no answer. Out on the farm, night fell like heavy cloth. Miguel heard cattle murmuring in the distance, a horse whinnying. Loneliness slipped between his fingers as he gripped an old hunk of wood, remnant of a fence. He wondered if she'd already forgotten him. If she remembered the quick brush of fingers, the lingering touch, the smile stolen between one argument and another. He lifted his face to the dark sky, felt the first drops start to fall, lightly. The smell of earth promised a storm. Miguel smiled sad, thought how the weather matched what he felt inside. The promise of some hope, mixed with fear and longing. And, for one small, nearly impossible instant, they both thought of each other at the same moment, separated by miles but joined by the same desperate wish for a second chance. Not yet brave enough to call, not strong enough to say all they felt out loud, just letting longing take root, in silence, waiting for a sign, a gesture, a miracle to break their shared pride. The city never went quiet, nor did the countryside. But what screamed loudest was the silence between them. That was the truest thing that night. The storm started before sunset, and it was different from the others. The sky hung so low it seemed about to swallow everything. The wind swept in from the fields, carrying the smell of damp earth mixed with dread, and everyone knew this wasn't just rain. It was a warning. Miguel felt it before the first rumble of thunder. Everyone was bunched near the barn, trying to cover the stored seed, horses restless in the stable. With each flash, trees cast haunted shadows across the ground, shapes restless as ghosts. It felt like even the farm, that patch of land he'd always thought he could control, was on the verge of slipping away. On the porch, the community gathered, soaked hats, hard faces full of worry. An old man wept for his crops. A young mother rocked her baby with shaking hands. Miguel paced to and fro, mentally checking fences, what could still be tied down, what would have to be let go. Amid the chaos, the wind-whipped shouts, the thing you couldn't miss was the empty space, the silence between the people. Luisa's absence weighed heavy. It felt like she'd taken with her a new way of dreaming, and left only the old harshness behind. The downpour hit hard. Boots sank into mud, eyes strained for hope in the blackness. No one spoke her name, but it was in every glance. The cowboy hadn't been himself since she left. Miguel tried not to show it. He barked orders, acted tough, but every so often, between chores, he'd gaze at the road, as if waiting for a miracle. Sometimes he stopped, drained, leaning against the side of the barn, running a nervous hand through his beard. He'd stay quiet, breathing deep, pretending all he felt was concern for the rain. It was longing and worry. Maybe just dumb fear, but it was fear. At the height of the storm, when it was pitch dark, everyone was too busy to notice. Only a boy, chasing a frightened calf, stopped short all of a sudden. The kid stared down the road, eyes wide, and stood there, soaked to the bone, unmoving. It looked like an old movie. The silhouette appeared, slow, almost lost in the curtain of rain. It was a woman in a light-colored overcoat, slumping on her shoulders. Her hair loose and sticking to her forehead, her feet sinking in the mud. No umbrella, no suitcase, just her eyes. Steely eyes. Miguel spotted the boy first, then turned and saw her. It took a moment for it to sink in. Suddenly, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Thunder, shouts, cattle. He forgot the cold, the tightness in his neck, the calluses on his hands. There was only her, coming towards him. Luisa walked, stumbling in the mud, face pale and out of place, but she never faltered. Each step looked forced from inside her, but she didn't stop. Her coat flapped open, her clothes plastered to her skin, but she kept walking. Close enough, nobody said a word. The world went quiet. Only the roar of the rain filled the space between them. She was breathing hard, chest rising and falling fast. Her eyes locked onto Miguel's, direct, a glance with no guard up. In his, barely contained shock, almost desperation, as if he was afraid to wake up. Luisa's hand trembled as she tucked her hair behind her ear. She bit her lip, distracted for a second, searching for that last bit of bravery. She took a deep breath. She might have looked small, but something about her was bigger than the storm. Nobody saw Miguel take a step forward. He stopped a couple feet from her, didn't touch, just felt the space between them. The rain pounded his hat, her hair, their boots and clothes. The silence was thick. You could hear your own breath in it. She opened her mouth once, then gave up on the right words. Her voice was barely audible. Miguel. His name came out differently, part pain, part hope. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. And she went on, slow, her voice surprisingly steady despite the shock. I thought I could leave. Thought I could go back to my old life. But it was a lie. She looked around, at the battered fields, the gathered community, the old man weeping nearby, at the way everyone watched without meeting her eyes, desperate for an answer. I wish I had your control. I wish I looked strong. But I'm tired of running. I'm tired of losing. I didn't come to save anything, Miguel. I came because I want to stay. I came because I want to try with you. In that moment, Miguel bowed his head a little, as if he carried the weight of ancient storms. He almost let out a silent laugh, that quiet kind, the laugh of someone who can hardly believe it. But he didn't leave. He looked deep into her eyes, the distance between them fading. Suddenly, there was only that good kind of exhaustion, the one you feel when you realize you don't have to pretend anymore. Louisa showed a pure, almost childlike fear in the split second before she smiled. Miguel reached out slowly, the tips of his fingers hesitant, as if still waiting for permission. The touch was light, almost nothing, just enough to say, "I'm here." And at that moment, everything else dissolved. It didn't matter if the future was uncertain, if the harvest might fail, if the rest of the world still had doubts or vague hopes. All that mattered now was the warmth of that hand holding hers in the middle of the storm. The sound of rain turned into an embrace around them. Somewhere behind, in the darkness, a woman's voice said, "About time." But it was pure, gentle happiness, that collective sigh of relief that comes when you witness love bloom where it seemed nothing else could grow. And when their hands tightened, both found a new breath. A silent promise, needing no witness. Maybe the sky was still falling. Maybe the roads ahead were still long. But right there, in that instant, it was all beginning again. Family, future, everything remade, drop by drop, built with the patient courage of someone who finally chooses to stay. I'll never forget that morning. The smell of wet earth still hung in the air, heavy but good, blending with the scent of fresh coffee and that crisp, new smell drifting through the open window. The house, once so quiet, felt transformed. I'd never heard so much laughter inside it, not real laughter. It was as if the walls themselves, somehow, were breathing out a little of the courage left hanging in the air after the storm the night before. Miguel was sitting at the table, his big hands wrapped around an old mug, his eyes drifting over me as I clumsily tried to organize the farm's papers and maps. He was never one for words, but that day, every look between us felt heavier, warmer. I could feel it even through my still damp clothes. In the tiny silences between our words, I heard a lightness that hadn't been there before. Maybe it was relief. I tried not to shake, but it was hard. Not just from the cold. The wind was slicing through, rattling the windows, but from that old fear that had always haunted me. Fear of starting something big and losing it all over again. Fear, above all, of trusting. Miguel watched me carefully. I could feel his eyes searching my face, looking for doubts. Or maybe just hoping to hear again what I'd said that night in the storm. "I'll stay," I had said, voice trembling, rain pounding outside. Now he searched for any sign I might take it back. Funny, how something so huge could fit inside such tiny gestures. People from the community came by, slowly. Some with hats, some with boots still caked in mud. Simple folk, cautious, but that morning, curious. Everyone wanted to know if it was true. If Luisa Prado, granddaughter of the old owner, would join her land with Miguel's. That she wouldn't sell to a stranger. I'd never seen so many eyes filled with questions. Miguel stood up, tipped his hat, walked through the living room, and stopped at my side. He didn't say anything. He just placed his hand on my waist, like someone quietly asking permission and saying, "It's our turn now." That touch nearly knocked the breath out of me. So simple, but so final. I still wasn't used to being touched like that, unafraid, unhurried. In front of everyone, Miguel was the first to break the silence. He wasn't one for speeches, but he said what needed to be said. "No one's dividing this land, and no one's tearing up any roots," he began. "Now, it's all together. What's mine is hers, and what's hers belongs here. If anyone wants to join us, they're welcome. But if you came looking for a fight, there's no place for that anymore." The crowd murmured softly, some smiled, others sighed with relief. I felt heat rising to my cheeks. For a second I wondered if this really was courage, or just fear of going back. But looking at Miguel, I found in his eyes everything I needed. Trust, tenderness, a glint of pride. It was as if, at last, someone saw who I really was. We signed the papers at the kitchen table, with the smell of hot bread and burnt coffee in the air. It couldn't have been more different from the courtrooms I'd known. There, no judge's robes, no ceremony. Just hands clasped and the respect of the people watching, some more moved than I ever expected. There were even a few tears. Donna Irene, looking at me from afar as if witnessing a miracle. Kids running around the porch, their shouts and laughter filling the place with hope. The laughter seemed to grow, as if it had been waiting a long time to be heard there. Every now and then, I'd catch Miguel's gaze, and time would slow for a moment. He'd smile, shyly, not quite showing his teeth, but with the corners of his eyes crinkling. I could see he was scared, too. Scared he wouldn't manage this new beginning. Scared I'd leave for the city at any moment. But today, courage was stronger than fear. I thought about the 2 lives we'd lived until then. Me, always surrounded by certainties and contracts, plotting every step to avoid pain. Him, soul-rooted in land, wary of anything from outside. Now, it was all mixed together, my delicate hands stained with sap and dirt, Miguel's fingers learning to leaf through papers, our shy laughter bumping into each other in the narrow hall. While everyone else celebrated, I leaned against a porch post, trying to hide from the noise. I needed a moment to breathe, to understand. Miguel came quietly, unhurried, like someone who knows how to listen to silence. He stood beside me, saying nothing, just stood there. And there was never a more beautiful silence. Because in that quiet, he was telling me he'd stay, even when fear crept back and storms returned. I glanced at him from the side. So much to say, but no words big enough. I let my head fall onto his shoulder. I felt a weight lift from my chest, slowly. The house, nothing but a shelter yesterday, now felt full of roots, promises, even a bit of faith. The walls still creaked, rain still fell outside. But inside me, it was as if the first sun of autumn was rising. There, together, pain gave way to hope. Maybe it wouldn't be perfect, maybe it wouldn't last forever. But for the first time, neither I nor Miguel needed any guarantees. Because today, what we had was the truth of our partnership, and the courage to put everything on the line for the love we'd found beneath the storm. I never thought the scent of old rain could blend so closely with the smell of flowers. But that morning, everything tasted of beginning again. The wooden house, once gray and hollow, now seemed to wake earlier. The floor creaked differently under Luisa's steps as she made coffee, eyes on the mist rising over the pastures. She didn't speak, but there was something about the way she lingered at the window, as if she was slowly learning to believe that this peace could really be hers. Miguel liked to pretend he didn't notice, but he saw everything. The way she strained the coffee, always so careful, as if keeping the details in order could stop the world from spinning off track. But now, in the little kitchen mishaps, the awkward smiles when she dropped a spoon, he saw someone who no longer fought herself so hard. Early mornings, the farm was a whole universe. Golden light on leather tack, the scent of wet earth mixed with wildflowers. The cattle lowing far off, and the sound of a stray laugh that didn't belong to Luisa the lawyer from Sao Paulo, but suited this new Luisa, with her messy braid, muddy boots, and old grandpa shirt. Of course, they argued. Sometimes over little things, the animals feed, the best way to fix a fence. But it was different now. The anger passed quickly, followed by a funny, gentle silence. Not the heavy silence from before. This one was light. A glance exchanged, sometimes a bump of the shoulder, like saying, "I'm here," without needing an apology. Bit by bit, Luisa stopped fearing putting down roots. She learned to drive the tractor, laughing at her own nerves. Got her hands dirty, nails scratched. Sometimes, Miguel would watch her from afar and feel a happy ache in his chest, seeing how she filled the empty spaces in his days. As if the future had changed color. Fear still existed, of course. It doesn't disappear so easily. Sometimes, Luisa would freeze as she looked at the letters from the office, the calls from another world begging her to come back. She'd sit quietly on the porch steps, eyes tight, fingers fidgeting with the makeshift ring she wore. Miguel respected that space. He'd just sit beside her and wait for her to come back, because by now, he knew she always would. At dusk, after work, they'd walk together to the farthest fence. The wind strong, green stretching as far as the eye could see. No words were necessary. The tired sun's warmth, the dust rising from the lane, the growing certainty that this place felt more like home every day. When she rested her head on his shoulder, everything was okay, at least until the next challenge. And there were many. Some neighbors still gave her suspicious looks, waiting for the city to pull her away. But Luisa wasn't easily discouraged. She learned the kids' names, the pleasure of long chats at the store, the delight of baking a simple cake on Saturdays. And Miguel, who'd never thought he'd lose his fear of loss, now felt only gratitude for the days, full of surprises and hope. In the barn, sometimes, it was almost a party. Folk gathering, the smell of hurried barbecue, silly jokes thrown around. The community grew closer. At the first spring celebration, Luisa still felt out of place, a little lost among the dancing and the children's shrieks. But it took only Miguel's hand in hers, a gentle squeeze, a steady look, for her to understand. It was all right to let go, if only for a while. The old grandfather's room, where she'd never managed a good night's sleep, turned into a tool shed. Miguel's dog learned to sleep on the rug in the living room. Even her mother's dishes, sent from Sao Paulo in a box, got used without fear at a birthday dinner. Glasses broken amid laughter, no tears. Sometimes, memories of childhood returned. A sharp ache, as if someone picked at an old scar. A stray scent, distant thunder, a sad look. But over time, those pains just became part of the fabric of life, not dictating her every move. She never told anyone, but she always noticed the way Miguel wiped sweat from his brow, just like her grandpa used to, and felt a quiet pride in the bridge between past and future. At first, she tried to plan it all, how long she'd stay, what she'd give up, how far she could go. Now, she no longer had answers for so many questions. She just lived. Sometimes so tired she'd sleep in her clothes, sometimes so happy she'd wake before dawn, just to catch Miguel quietly laughing at the new urgency of someone who finally doesn't want to miss a thing. This was no fairy tale. They slipped back into routine, fought over nothing, sometimes lost money, sometimes gained only patience. But at the end of every day, there was this simple feeling that this was where they belonged. When they looked back, they didn't see just loss anymore. Journeys taken, bridges built, courage found. In Miguel's eyes, peace. In Luisa's, a different kind of bravery. The old fear of love was now just another faint line on the palm, a scar turned into story. And as spring blossomed everywhere, Luisa and Miguel learned, together, that risking it all is worth it. Even if it hurts. Even if it's scary. Because, in the end, it's looking into another's eyes that we finally find our way home.